Hello again, welcome back. Here we are to talk about JavaScript, and we're going to start a brand new project. And what we're going to do in this project is we're going to look at the concept of callbacks and move on to promises and use this to handle asynchronous data. And our goal in the end is to make a library that works with some sort of Internet API. And you can decide on the Internet API. I'm going to use the Open Weather Map API, and you can use that one also if you like. But if you want to choose a different API, you can do that too. So far I have my project started here. And what I have is an empty folder with two files. So I have an index.html file that's empty, and I have a main.js file that's empty. So there isn't much here, right? I just started with these two files. So let's talk about callbacks for a moment. So what is a callback? So a callback is a function that you pass to another function. So let's mock up our weather API. So I'm going to go to main.js here and make a function called getWeather. Oops, I misspelled function there. And there's my weather call, right? My weather API. And the idea here is, what I want to do is I want to return weather data. Okay, so you would call this function and it would return some weather data to you, right? The problem is returning the weather data is asynchronous, right? So it happens over time. Like we call the function and it can't immediately return the data. Okay? It has to connect to the internet, like go out to another server, find the data, process the data, and then send it back. So what we can't do is we can't just say return. Let's imagine our weather data look like this. So we could say description is, cloudy, chance of rain, right? And the temperature is 62 degrees. So I can't just say return that. I mean, I could, but but in reality, it's not going to work this way, right? So you could call your getWeather function like this, and somehow you need to get your data. So you could say const, data equals getWeather, right? And this would work, but if I logged my data like this would actually work, but it's not how this problem is going to work for us in reality, right? So let's try it. So I'm going to say node and then do main.js, and then it says description, chance of rain, temperature 62. So I called the function, it returned the data. Now the problem is this, right? Really, this is going to take, fetching the data takes some time. It doesn't happen immediately. So if you have a function that returns something, it returns that something like right at the moment, right? So we call the code here, and then immediately it returns the data and we pick it up. But the reality is here, what's going to happen is you're going to have to make a call to the internet, to your API, and get your data from the service. Let's simulate that with a set timeout. So set timeout is a function that delays an action for a certain amount of time, right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to wait a number of seconds, right? And what we'll do is we'll put a callback here. So I've typed a function in, right? So a callback is a function that we pass to another function, right? Which is what we're doing here, right? So I got set timeout, and the first parameter is a callback. The second parameter is how many seconds we should wait. So let's wait 2,000 milliseconds. So actually I should say milliseconds to wait, right? And then inside the callback here, what I want to do is I want to return this, right? And this isn't going to work, right? So I'll just try it, right? But that's not going to work for us. So let's run our code and test it, and it returns undefined. Weird, right? Like what happened there, right? So what happened here was this. you tried to return this value from the inner function here, right? And this function had already ended. So we called getWeather. I said getWeather. It set up the callback. This is going to take 2,000 milliseconds to complete. And then the computer got all the way to here, and there wasn't a return statement in the first function, so it returned undefined. The callback was set up, 2,000, or the timeout was set up, and 2,000 milliseconds later, the timeout runs this callback for us and returns this value to nowhere, right? It actually returns it to right here inside this function, but the function is, gone and doesn't, it doesn't exist anymore, right? Actually it kind of returns it to whatever called this function, right? But that service is not doing anything, right? So how do we make this work, right? Well, we can add our own callback. So you can see that here I have a callback where it's a function that I pass into another function. What if we did the same thing? What if we made getWeather accept a function as a parameter, right? Let's try it. So I'm going to call this CB for callback. Actually, let's just spell it out, callback, right? There we go. So I got a callback here. And what I can do is, instead of returning this function or this data here, what I'll do is I'll call the callback, right? And to execute the callback, here it's a variable. So I just put a name, I put a name on it, right? And the value gets put in there, and the value happens to be a function. And if the value is a function, you can put the parentheses on the end and execute that function, right? So what I want to do is I want to, call this callback and then take the data here and pass it to that function. Okay, so I've got my callback here. It came into getWeather. We ran the set timeout with its own callback. And then when set timeout resolves 2,000 milliseconds later, it runs this callback for us and takes the weather data and passes it in, right? So this is also not going to work down here. So we've got, this is working here, but the way that we've arranged the code here isn't going to work for us. We can't just get the data directly out of getWeather. What we need to do now is we need to include the callback inside as a parameter here, and then get the data from there, okay? So just like set timeout takes a function here, what we're going to do is we're going to put a function here as our callback. So this is essentially the value that gets assigned to callback. Okay, so this gets assigned here, and this is what is going to be running when the timeout resolves. So again, this callback, when we run it, is this function, and the value that you pass in here is the value that gets put into the parameter spot here. So I'm going to say data, and then, sorry, people are slacking me there. And then what we're going to do is we can do something with the data callback, right? Or with the data that was sent to the callback. So I'll take this console log message here and put it inside, right? So that looks like a lot of JavaScript you've probably seen and worked with, right? Sorry, these people keep slacking me, right? So anyway, so here we go. So we got data. I got my weather callback. I'm going to call it. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to clear the console here, execute main.js. 2 seconds later, and there we got our weather data, right? So we actually ran this code. So let's follow it through again. We called get data. We passed this function to get data, and so it's stored here inside this parameter variable. We set up a timeout, and we passed in another callback function to set timeout, and set timeout delayed for 2 seconds, and then it executed the callback that we passed in, and it passed the data to that function as a parameter. So it was received here, right? So this is the callback function, and this is the data that was passed in, or this is the parameter value, right? Okay, so that's kind of a lot there. It's important though. This is like how JavaScript works. This is a very common thing in JavaScript. We see callbacks everywhere. What I'd like you to do right now is take a quick read of this article here called Introduction to Callbacks, okay? And this kind of goes over the things that I did in my example. You can recreate my example, rewind the video, take a look at it, recreate it for yourself, and then read through this article here, okay? And follow this through, and then we can kind of talk more about it, right? And there's an item in here where they get to this section at the bottom here called callback and a callback, right? And then, oh, actually, this handling errors section, right? So callback and a callback is kind of what we just did, right? So we had a callback passed into our function, and then we had another callback in set timeout, and we called one inside the other. And then down here in handling errors, right, they have two callbacks. Like they have, they're going to use an error callback and a script callback, right? So what I'm going to say is compare that to what we have and imagine as a challenge. What you need to do is you need to imagine that you had to also handle an error when you called get weather. So if something went wrong here, you want to call an error message or prepare an error message that can be used for get weather. So get weather can receive an error, okay? So see if you can figure that out. Just give it a try. It's not like a big problem. Just come up with like an idea of how you would formulate that solution, and then read the article and then come back for the next video.